Hello guys, welcome back. The topic that we are going to discuss today is menstrual cycle. Okay, it is a very important topic. Menstrual cycle. Now this menstrual cycle is also known as uterine cycle. So don't get confused by the name uterine cycle, because uterine cycle is also the name of menstrual cycle. Okay, so what is menstrual cycle? Menstrual cycle is basically a cyclical changes, right? It is basically a cyclical change that occurs in the endometrium of the uterus in female, right? It is a cyclical changes occurring in the endometrium of the uterus. Now since this cycle is taking place in the uterus, that is why this is also known as uterine cycle. Clear? There are two cycles that we study in female reproductive system. The first one is the ovarian cycle taking place in the ovary, right? And the other one is a uterine cycle or the menstrual cycle taking place in the uterus. Okay? So this is considered roughly for 28 days. The length of the cycle is considered to be of 28 days. Here, what happens is the first day of bleeding, okay? The first day of bleeding will start the onset of menstruation, right? The first day of bleeding in the present month, it will start the onset of menstruation up till the first day of bleeding of next month, right? So the first day of bleeding marks the onset of menstruation in this present month, and the first day of bleeding in the next month, right? So the length between these 2 days is considered as one menstrual cycle. Okay? Is usually considered as one menstrual cycle. So menstrual cycle is basically the changes taking place in the endometrium. So why are those changes taking place in the endometrium? The main function, or the main purpose of this cycle is to prepare the endometrium for reception of the fertilized ovum. Okay, this is the main purpose. Now, menstrual cycle is divided into 4 phases. Okay, if we menstrual cycle, it is divided into 4 phases. Alright. So the first phase is the post-menstrual phase. Okay. The first phase is the post-menstrual phase. The second phase is the proliferative phase. The third phase is the secretory phase. And lastly, we have the menstrual phase. Okay? The first phase, we have the post-menstrual phase, the proliferative phase, the secretory phase, and the menstrual phase. So, post-menstrual phase, if we draw a diagram in this way, representing the days of the month, 1 to 4. Alright, the first 1 to 4 where bleeding usually occurs is the menstrual phase, right? So let me just write over here as well, the menstrual phase. From 5 till 8 is considered as the post-menstrual phase, right? Post-menstrual phase. Got it? From day 1 to day 4 is considered as the menstrual phase. From day 5 to day 8 is considered as the post-menstrual phase. From day 9 to day 18, right, is considered as the proliferative phase, and from day 18, day 19 to day 28 is considered as the secretory phase. This is the proliferative phase. This is post-menstrual phase. Okay, day 1 to 4 is the menstrual phase, day 5 to 8 is the post-menstrual phase, day 9 to day 18 is the proliferative phase, and day 19 to day 28 is the secretory phase. Okay, now the first phase, that is the post-menstrual phase and the proliferative phase, right? Both these phases, okay? The post-menstrual phase and the proliferative phase, it is usually considered that these two stages or these two phases, they are under the control of estrogen, okay? They are under the control of estrogen secreted by the follicles, okay? They are in the topic oogenesis. I have explained it to you. If you want, you can go back and study the portion once again. So during oogenesis, we know that follicles are being developed, right? So those follicles, they produce a hormone, or they produce the hormone estrogen. So it is considered that post-menstrual phase and the proliferative phase is under the action of estrogen secreted by the follicles. That is why this two phase is also known as follicular phase, okay? Phase 1 and 2 is known as the follicular phase. Clear? Okay. The next, following ovulation, right? Following ovulation, when the ovum is separated, the remaining portion, right, the graphene follicle, gets converted into a structure known as corpus luteum. Right? Why is corpus luteum important? Because corpus luteum secretes a hormone known as progesterone. Right? So, after ovulation, the corpus luteum secretes progesterone. So, it is considered that the phase 3rd and 4th, secretory phase and the menstrual phase, is under the influence, right, or under the action of the hormone progesterone, which is being secreted by corpus luteum. Right? That is why the 3rd and 4th phase is known as luteal phase. Okay, so the first and the second phase is known as follicular phase because it is under the action of estrogen secreted by follicles, and the 3rd and 4th phase, since it is under the action of progesterone secreted by corpus luteum, it is also known as luteal phase. Okay, so the changes that are usually occurring in all these phases are basically continuous. Okay, so the basic changes that will occur here are the thickness of the endometrium will start increasing in each phase, right? With each advancing phase, the thickness of the endometrium will start increasing. We have uterine glands, so the dimensions of the uterine gland will also start increasing. And the surface lining, right? The surface lining of the epithelial of the glands, they will also change. Okay, so I will try to explain to you with the help of a diagram. Here I have drawn a rough diagram of the representation of each phases of menstrual cycle. So what really happens with each phase is, the first thing, the first changes taking place is the changes or increase in length of endometrium. Okay, so with each phase, the length of the endometrium is increasing. In the first phase, that is a post-menstrual phase, the length of the endometrium is somewhat 0.5 to 1 millimeter. In the next phase, that is a proliferative phase, it changes to 2 to 3 millimeter, and in the secretory phase, it becomes 5 to 7 millimeter. So you can see here, again after secretory phase, when everything is shed off, it again comes to a position or in a place where it is less than the size of the post-menstrual phase. Okay, so as you can see, with each phase, with each continuous phase, you can see that there is a increase in the length of the endometrium, right? The second here is changes in the uterine glands, right? In the dimension of the uterine gland. At first you can see that the uterine gland, it is straight, but as it goes towards different phases, in the proliferative phase, it starts assuming a different shape, right? It becomes somewhat convoluted, and you can see here in the secretory phase, it becomes convoluted, right? So because acquiring this convoluted position, the uterine gland appears somewhat saw-toothed in appearance. Saw-toothed in appearance. Okay, So we have a changes in the uterine gland as well. And thirdly, we have change in the epithelial lining of the gland. Okay. Third here is we have change in the epithelial lining of the gland, the uterine gland. Now, as you can see, in the post-menstrual phase, the lining is it consists of cells which are cuboidal in shape. Okay, all these cells are cuboidal in shape. But as the phase increases in the proliferative phase, you can see that we have the cells, the cuboidal cells now have turned into columnar cells. Okay, now if you look properly, and I am sure you also might know this, that the nucleus in the columnar cell is present towards the base, right? Here what happens is, when the menstrual cycle is in the proliferative phase, glycogen rich materials are produced, because of which this nucleus are pushed towards the lumen. So in the next stage, in the secretory phase, you can see that we still have the columnar cells, but the nucleus are present towards the lumen. So as stage passes on into the menstrual phase, with the menstrual bleeding, the epithelium will be sloughed off, the endometrium will be sloughed off. Along with this, the apical portion of this cell, right, the apical portion of this gland, it is also removed. Okay. Now what happens is, when the phase comes from the post-menstrual and goes into the proliferative phase, what happens here is the endometrium, right? The endometrium, it gets differentiated into three layers. The first one is I'll write the full form over there. We have the stratum spongiosum and stratum basal. Okay, so here we can see that the endometrium is divided into three parts, or it is differentiated into three layers. The first one, which is towards the base, is known as the stratum basal. Okay, it's known as the stratum basal. The second one in the middle is known as the stratum spongiosum. And lastly, we have the stratum compactum. Okay. So this change takes place in the proliferative phase, and here the artery, okay, the artery, it is also not in a spiral position. Here the artery is very short to start with. Now when this phase when this menstrual cycle goes into the secretory phase, what happens here is all these three layers, right, they become very well defined. In the proliferative phase, of course, it is present in the proliferative phase, but it is not that well defined. But in the secretory phase, it becomes well defined. All these three layers becomes well defined. So if I write over here, compactum, spongiosum, and stratum basal. Right? We have these three areas or three layers. The superficial 2/3 part, that is the stratum compactum and the stratum spongiosum, is known as the functional zone. Okay? Both this part is known as the functional zone. Because with menstrual bleeding, when menstrual bleeding occurs, this two layer will be sloughed off. Okay? The remaining portion, that is the stratum basal, it is known as the regenerative zone. Okay? Because this is the area which is left in the menstrual phase, and from this area it will again start growing. It will again start increasing the length of the endometrium. Okay? So since stratum basal is remained there, it is known as the regenerative zone. Okay, so at the end of the secretory phase, what we can see is we have a very well defined three stratum layers: the stratum compactum, the stratum spongiosum, and the stratum basal. The endometrium is very thick, right? It is very thick and very edematous because of the fluid content released by the uterine gland, and it is also very much vascular. Now in this proliferative phase, the arterial supply was there, but the arteries were very small to start with. Now when menstrual cycle is in the secretory phase, the arteries, they become very tortuous in condition. Okay, so the arteries assume somewhat in this area, somewhat in this few arteries, they remain short. So the artery that become very tortuous, they are known as the spiral artery. Okay, these are known as the spiral artery. And the arteries that remain short, which basically do not participate in menstrual bleeding, they remain short. Okay, so the tortuous artery, they are known as the spiral artery. So these are the changes that takes place in the postmenstrual, the proliferative, and the secretory phase. Now, in the absence of fertilization, when there is no pregnancy, what happens is all this preparation which was made, right? All the preparation which was made for the reception of the fertilized ovum. Now, if there is no pregnancy, no fertilization, that means there is no fertilized ovum. What happens is menstrual bleeding starts occurring, along with which the superficial 2/3 part of the endometrium is sloughed off, right? So, sometimes the invigilator may ask, why does menstrual bleeding occur? So, what happens is approximately 2-3 hours before menstrual bleeding, what happens is the spiral artery, they get constricted. Okay, when the spiral artery they get constricted, the endometrium, of course, if there is no blood supply, this portion will go under ischemic condition. So this ischemic condition leads to degeneration of the endometrium. Okay, the first point, the spiral artery they get constricted and damages the endometrium, or results in the degeneration of the endometrium. Now in the second part, when the constricted artery, okay, in this point, when the artery gets constricted, right, when the artery gets constricted, the endometrium is degenerated, along with which the spiral artery, the walls of these blood vessels, they are also damaged. Okay, they are also damaged. Now in the second part, when the spiral artery will get relaxed, okay, when the spiral artery, this one, when the spiral artery will get relaxed, this means that blood will start flowing to the endometrium again. But we also know that the wall of the blood vessel is damaged, right? So through that damaged blood vessels, blood will start leaking out. Okay, this is the result as to how menstrual bleeding takes place. Okay, this is how menstrual bleeding takes place. So when menstrual bleeding occurs, the 2/3 part of the endometrium is also sloughed off. Okay, so this is how a menstrual cycle occurs. Okay, so the 4 phases, and all these changes are taking place in the 4 phases of the menstrual cycle. I hope this is very much clear. Now here I will try to explain you about the hormonal control of menstrual cycle as well. Okay. As we all know that menstrual cycle is under the control of hormones released by the anterior pituitary gland, right? So let's see how does this hormone affect menstrual cycle. The hypothalamus acts as a major center for reproduction. Okay, what hypothalamus does is it releases, or it stimulates, or it secretes a GnRH, right? Hypothalamus secretes GnRH. What is GnRH? GnRH is gonadotrophin releasing hormone. Okay, it releases the hypothalamus secretes GnRH. Okay, this acts on the anterior pituitary gland and results in the formation of 2 gonadotrophins. What are those 2 gonadotrophins? We have the follicular stimulating hormone and the luteinizing hormone. Right? These are the 2 gonadotrophins. So what happens is, in the first phase of the menstrual cycle, okay, in the first half of the menstrual, not phase, in the first half of the menstrual cycle, hypothalamus secretes GnRH. This GnRH, it acts on the anterior pituitary gland and releases, or it stimulates the secretion of follicular stimulating hormone. This follicular stimulating hormone, now as the name itself suggests, follicular stimulating, right? This follicular stimulating hormone, it stimulates the ovary and results in the formation and maturation of follicles, or the ovarian follicles, right? Okay, so this will go and stimulate the ovary It will go and stimulate the ovary to form ovarian follicles. Right? Now when the ovarian follicle is formed, or when the follicles is formed, we know that the follicles secrete a hormone known as estrogen. So from the ovarian follicles we will get estrogen. So this is the hormone with the help of which the endometrium does its repairment. Okay? The repairment or changes taking place in the endometrium during the first phase of the menstrual cycle is under the effect or under the action of estrogen. The level of estrogen, it rises to a peak at about 1 day or 2 days before the ovulation. Okay? Estrogen, it rises to a peak, due to which it results in the sudden increase, right, of the level of LH. Okay? The estrogen, it rises to a peak just before 2 days of ovulation, which results in the sudden increase in the level of LH, which means LH surge. Okay, so increase in estrogen results in increase of luteinizing hormone known as the LH surge. Right, now we know very well that LH surge, during LH surge, what this luteinizing hormone does is it results in ovulation. So the granulosa cells which is left behind after ovulation, they get converted into corpus luteum. Right, they get converted into corpus luteum. So after LH is released or LH surge occurs, ovulation takes place, resulting in the formation of corpus luteum. Now we very well know that corpus luteum is the structure that releases progesterone. Right? So although a small amount of estrogen is also released, but progesterone predominates the amount. Okay? So with the combined effect of progesterone and estrogen, both this hormone, what it does is it releases or it secretes a glycogen-rich mucous material. Okay? Now there are two conditions. The first condition is if pregnancy occurs, and the other one is if pregnancy does not occur. So since we are talking about menstruation, let's take the second condition first, that is if pregnancy does not occur. Now what happens is if fertilization does not occur, the granulosa cells, it secretes a protein known as inhibin. Okay? It releases a protein known as inhibin. This inhibin goes and acts on the anterior pituitary gland to inhibit the release or production of follicular stimulating hormone and the luteinizing hormone. Now it is very much clear and very easy to understand that if inhibin goes and inhibits the anterior pituitary gland, no FSH and LH will be released. If FSH and LH is not released, no corpus luteum will be formed. Right? So if FSH and LH is not released, it will ultimately lead to the regression of this corpus luteum. Now when this corpus luteum is regressed, the progesterone and estrogen is not going to be released. So there will be a fall in the blood level of progesterone and estrogen. This fall in the level of progesterone and estrogen will trigger the endometrium, or will trigger the onset of menstruation, and the superior 2/3 of the endometrium, it will be sloughed off. Okay, so when inhibin goes and inhibits the anterior pituitary gland, no FSH and LH will be released. If these are not released, ultimately corpus luteum will not be formed. If corpus luteum is not formed, progesterone and estrogen level will fall in the blood level, which will ultimately trigger the onset of menstruation. It will regress the endometrium, right? And it will trigger the onset of menstruation. Now the condition when pregnancy occurs, right? If pregnancy occurs, the secretory phase of the menstrual cycle, it will go on, and the corpus luteum will secrete progesterone. Okay, so when it starts secreting progesterone and when it will continue secreting progesterone, the menstrual cycle will be stopped. Okay, so this is how the hormone is controlling. The hormone, the follicular stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone helps in the production of estrogen, progesterone, under which all these hormonal controls are taking place. Okay, so I have tried to make this topic as simple as I can. If there are any doubts, please feel free to comment box and we will solve the problem together. Yeah. Okay, so thank you.